Let's admit everyone.
Perfect. I think we will make a start in just a second, actually, just conscious of time. I think it's 12:30 now, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you for joining, everybody. This is, I think it's number 8 in the series of webinars this year. And today we're going to be looking at one of our propositions from Mint UK called Proactive Discover and how you as a customer can use that to optimize your current D365 landscape in a pretty quick and efficient way. So just to have a quick look at what we're going to cover today. So just some common experiences that we typically see with finance and operations and customers that have implemented this, and actually some of the elements that we feel prevent customers from actually achieving the return on investment that they originally set out to do. A little bit around Mint Group and Mint UK, who we are and what we're known for. And then we're going to really focus on Proactive Discover, which is our pre-implementation methodology. And as I mentioned, how that can be used to optimize your current D365 landscape. We're also going to take some time just through this presentation to talk about licensing and optimization, in particular with reference to some of the changes that are coming into force in November. Okay, so we all know that F&O, F&SCM is technically and functionally pretty good. However, we do see some common themes as to why businesses don't tend to get the most out of their investment.
Just a second, Sammy. I think the slides are not moving, so you're still on slide 1.
Oh, really?
Yes.
How strange.
Hmm.
Sorry, everyone, just bear with. Has that moved, Kat?
No.
Sorry, everyone. I can move them forward. I don't know why.
I think
I'm
mine's moving, Julie. I think it's just a presentation problem.
Right, Kat, can you see that move to?
Oh, yes.
Slide
yes.
2. I'll do it. Okay, so just let me know which slide. Sorry, guys. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, everybody.
I don't know why. Sorry.
If you could just move to slide 3, please, Julie. So we're just talking around basically finance and operations. It works. It's an ERP system that has evolved rapidly over the past decade in particular, and it's a pretty good fit for most businesses across finance and operations. However, we do see a common theme as to why businesses don't tend to get the return on investment that they're anticipating. I just wanted to go through some of these themes prior to launching into this presentation. So if you could just click one, please, Julie.
I think I'm doing it, Sammy, so go on. Yeah, I clicked.
Perfect. Okay, first one's really basic, requirements. So what we typically see is that these requirements are driven by IT. So you end up with a solution which is really focused on IT-based requirements and not necessarily directed by the business. And as a result, what you tend to get is a solution which typically isn't fit for purpose and tends to lead to people going off and doing lots of processes off system and not actually using the D365 solution. Okay, next one. So documentation. So this speaks to the fact that, oh, I've just seen the message pop up. I'll tell you what, guys, let me just reshare. Bear with, sorry. Okay. Let me take it off presenter mode. And let's hope this works. Okay. Can everybody see a white screen with requirements and solution blueprint written on?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's better.
It would seem that the attendees can forward as well. I don't know what's happening there. Sorry, guys. But yeah, everyone will get a copy of the slides
the more the better.
After the event.
we'll make it more interactive than it initially was intended to be. But anyway, solution blueprints. I'm sure everybody on this call is going to resonate with what I'm about to say. But this includes documentation from the implementation, different partners implement in different ways, and they have different levels of documentation and audit trail as to what you're having implemented. But more so, what I'm referring to is how that documentation is maintained after the fact. So you'll go live on finance and operations. You might have an account of the solution blueprint. However, changes are made to the system and all of a sudden that documentation is redundant. And the reason why I always find this really interesting is because actually I don't see how a managed service or a support offering can be offered if we don't have a really up-to-date account on what is actually in the solution. I don't know how we can judge what is a change versus what is a defect without that. Okay, template. So lack of common business process. For everything that we do at Mint, our methodology is based on business process. That's not to say we take you away from the standard product, but we base everything on a 2B business process prior to even going anywhere near the technology. And there's multiple reasons for that I'll touch on a little later in the slides. What we typically see is that F&O is reserved for businesses that are large for a start. It's a heavy ERP system, have multiple businesses, are operational in multiple countries, have multiple legal entities. And what tends to happen is that a solution is built and it is not standardized at all across any of those units, which makes it very difficult to onboard new businesses, particularly if a business's objective is to grow via acquisition. Wrong partner. This is quite a big statement, but F&SCM, finance and operations, is quite a specialised area. And what we have seen in the past is customers have moved forward with the partner, implemented finance and operations, and there are customizations and unwarranted ISV solutions when actually the standard D365 product could have fulfilled that functionality and those requirements. License spend. So just as I touched on earlier, we do everything by business process and by role. And without that level of definition, it is very difficult to ascertain what the licensing structure should be for your business. And as a result, what happens is you end up with a suboptimal structure. Either that impacts performance because you're under licensed, or what's about to happen in the next 2 months is there will be restrictions to certain people accessing the system. I think, is it from the 1st of November, Kat, that Microsoft are going to actively start putting the banner on the screens and restricting access for that?
Yes. So if users don't have the right license at that point, they may not be able to access certain areas within the system. From 1st of November. Yeah.
Okay. Inefficient integrations. So very similar to what I mentioned earlier around customizations and ISVs. If a partner does not know the D365 F&O solution inside out, what we have seen in the past is that the system ends up integrated to a third-party solution, and actually that could be consumed and handled by F&O. And the downside of having many integrations, I'm sure you're all aware, is there's a security risk, an inherent security risk of having lots of different endpoints, but it can also impact performance of your ERP solution as well. And as I mentioned earlier, business process doesn't necessarily marry up to the technology. This is definitely an issue when it comes to updates. So the F&O solution has 4 updates per year, and within 2 of those major releases, there's a lot of functionality. And without actually knowing what the underlying business process is and how the technology marries to that, it is very difficult to benefit from those upgrades and those changes in functionality. And of course, all of those combined lead to this poor return on investment, which is what I mentioned earlier. And in fact, I think it was a Gartner study that mentioned that 40% of businesses actually fail to realise the return on investment associated to that ERP implementation. So just before we jump into Proactive Discover, which is what I mentioned earlier, just introducing us as a group. So Mint Group have been around for 25 years. We're a full stack partner, which means we do everything from F&O to CRM to Copilot, Azure, Power Apps, everything across the board. We are an inner circle partner for business applications and AI, and have been for the past decade. And importantly, we hold all 7 solution designations, which means that we hold a level of referenceability and certification in all areas across the Microsoft stack. Just honing in as well on the business applications designations, we have all specializations across the board within business applications. Just to call out as well, we are fast track ready. which is really important for our customers because it means that we have an access to Microsoft both in implementation and in support that's typically more expedited than a partner that is not fast track ready. And it also means that we have direct access to Microsoft architects should we need to reach out and discuss anything around solution. Okay, so what is Proactive Discover? So in essence, it is a relatively quick and easy way to ascertain whether finance and operations is being used optimally within your business or whether it can be used optimally within your business. So it's suitable for greenfield customers that don't have D365 at the moment, perhaps have another ERP or don't have ERP at all. But is also suitable for customers that have D365. It's in operation, but actually you might not be getting the most out of your functionality, and it might not actually marry back nicely to your future state or as is business process. So just a few words on it. So it is based on something called Microsoft Catalyst, which some of you might be aware of. So this is Microsoft's answer to design-led thinking. So this is the whole discussion around how an ERP should evolve prior to going near the technology. It's based on those concepts, and importantly, it is based on standard capability. So when we discuss anything to do with D365 or take any customers through this Proactive Discover engagement, what we wouldn't do is look to put a future state business process in place that moved you away from the standard capability. It is all about using the standard capability across finance operations and across other elements of the stack. I've already mentioned it is business first. So there are quite a few stages to Proactive Discover that I'll touch on a little later, two of which stand out here. So one is something called an envisioning workshop. So this is a kind of blue sky thinking workshop of where do you want your business to be in 5-10 years time. Forget about the technology at the minute. Where do you want to be as a business? You know, what are your revenue targets? What are your profitability targets? What are your targets for expansion? What are your targets for vertical integration? And really discussing what we should take into account when we design an underlying to-be process for you as a business before we go anywhere near finance and operations. The next level is to talk to stakeholders from across the business and try and ascertain what this future state process should be. So that involves us using some of our IP, which I'll touch on a little later in terms of business process mapping as a base, but also discussing areas of challenge and optimization with different functions in the business to come up with this future state and optimized to-be process. At the end of that, we will have quite a nice target operating model end to end, which is then used as a basis to play back to the business and as a storyboard and just make sure that everybody involved is bought into this future state and this future way of thinking before you typically move into collecting requirements and how to configure and fine-tune elements of finance and operations. I mentioned earlier about things being business value driven. So once we have this future state end to end, we will then suggest a roadmap of optimizations based on business value. So this is a really easy way of getting information getting information articulated really nicely in terms of what we should optimize across the stack and what the quantified value is for you as a business. So you'll receive that roadmap. And we'll also mention importantly those areas where we can see there's areas of heavy customization, and actually we'll think about ways we can bring that back to standard, either using the standard product or suggesting a process change based on what we've seen across similar businesses within similar industries. Customer focus. This is quite an intuitive piece, but it's always quite popular with our customers. So once we have that roadmap and we've done the business value assessment, you will also receive a full end-to-end implementation plan. And that doesn't just cover partner resource, our resource, it also covers the level of commitment that you would need as a business in terms of people to implement these things effectively. Mention the IP, so there's two areas that I'm going to touch on today as part of Proactive, which is our business process maps that I mentioned. So these are based on verticals and based on best practice within industry. And there's also something called an application model that we use for any of our deployment and pricing, but I'll take you guys through that just a little bit later. The other thing that I've mentioned here is our base build automation. So this isn't necessarily related to Proactive Discover, but it's part of our support offering as standard. So whenever we take an account on, a finance and operations account, We will make sure that we have a base build in place, which is a really granular level account of what you have, parameters and features within finance and operations. And importantly, we have a way of keeping that updated in an automated way, so that if there are any changes made to that landscape, we've got a most up-to-date account of what those changes are and what actually resides in your finance and operations solution. And just to mention here, so as a group, we're full stack. Here in the UK, we are heavily aligned to finance and operations. So we solely focus on the implementation of finance and operations. However, we do architect across the stack. So whenever we suggest this end-to-end process, we're not just looking at finance and operations. If there's an opportunity to introduce Power Apps because there's a gap, we'll suggest that. If there's an opportunity to introduce Copilot agents because actually you might benefit from a replacement of a certain process with that functionality, then we will suggest that as well. So while this business process is based on value stream and it's end-to-end and it's role-based, it does heavily link back to the D365 taxonomy. Okay, so I just wanted to call up, these are just a few of our multi-service customers, customers that either work with us from a support perspective, a proactive perspective, or from an implementation perspective. But there's three that I want to focus on in particular today from a proactive perspective. So all of these customers that I'm displaying here, so ABFI, Marshalls and Gripple, are manufacturing customers. However, proactive is not restricted to the manufacturing industry, and our IP is not restricted to the manufacturing industry either. So we have a suite of process maps that fit most industries and are continuously updated. But I've called these three out because actually there's slight nuances between each of the engagements that I thought would be useful just to discuss. So if we take ABFI, ABFI is a business made up of 8 very autonomous business units across different countries, so across the UK, across Europe and across the US. And the use case for proactive was actually, number one, is finance and operations a good fit for us from a ERP perspective? And actually, are we able to achieve a level of standardization and template approach across these different units? When we started this engagement, the business were adamant that there was absolutely no common process between any of these businesses. However, we were able to drag out those common business processes and actually define an 80% template, whilst also taking into account the nuances and the autonomy of each of the different business units. The result of that was a target operating model, a suite of end-to-end business processes for all of those units, common processes, and a full implementation and rollout plan based on value. Marshalls, slightly different. So Proactive Discover was used in the context of, okay, half the business has D365, the other half is still on-prem in AX 2012. How do we optimize the use of D365? And importantly, how do we migrate the functionality of AX 2012 to D365 in an optimized way? Now, I'm sure, as you're all aware, it's never a migration with AX 2012. It's always an optimization. They're both very different products, and Proactive was used to draw out those optimizations and what that to-be process would look like. So again, it was used to optimize a to-be solution and come up with a template across 7 units within the UK. There was a big drive here to move away from a long list of customizations associated to legacy ERP. So we used this process to identify which customizations we could retire essentially and take back to standard. Gripple, greenfield implementation, no existing ERP at all. Wanted to qualify the fit of finance and operations and CRM, so pretty much full stack. As a fit for their ERP solution across the UK. They had around 50 sites within the UK. We ran the Proactive Discover with them, again, came up with a to-be future state business process and template, and then also worked with them to come up with a rollout plan to the different areas across the UK. Worth mentioning as well, so Microsoft will fund elements of this proactive engagement. There are criteria, so happy to work with you if you reach out and we can see whether we can get that funding in place. They will fund it. However, we do offer something called Proactive Light as well, which is an expedited process, an expedited proactive that offers fewer deliverables, but that is totally free of charge, and we can run that within a matter of days as well. Okay, so just to run through some of the steps associated to Proactive Discover. So this is reflecting the full proactive. So in some cases, it might be fully funded, might be partially funded. But it's a really nice way of getting people onboarded and thinking into the future state. We would give people access to our online survey to collect basic business requirements to see whether F&O is a good fit in the case of a business where F&O isn't currently used as the ERP solution. So we'd qualify finance and operations. We'd produce something called a solution analysis document, which allows us to play back some of the areas that might not be a fit. It allows us to also play back some of our suggestions around exceptions, integrations, customizations, etc. Once we have that in place, we'd run the Envision workshop, which is the blue sky thinking, really business-based workshop where we're looking at purely business objectives and we're not necessarily talking about finance and operations and ERP. And then we'd go into a series of solution assessment workshops. Now, these are relatively intensive. Just being thoroughly transparent. They require input from the business, so typical business process owners, typically those individuals that are being involved in implementation, should this move forward to an implementation. And it would be a really thorough assessment by value stream, so order to cash, procure to pay, etc., of what works well today versus what does not work well today. And actually, as I mentioned, we would use our suite of IP, our vertically aligned business process maps, as a base to start suggesting a future state of things. Once we'd been through those workshops, we'd amalgamate that information into one thorough end-to-end business process, and then we'd play it back, taking everybody on the journey. So everybody involved would be aware of what that solution looks like and what the future state looks like, and we'd ensure we get thorough buy-in, which is essential prior to move into implementation, because at least then you have the change management aspect already kicked off before you start looking at the lower level detail and analysis. Once everybody's bought into that, we would suggest areas that we feel are of best value to a business. So these would be based on your must and should requirements, but also based on our knowledge of what we know would add most value versus what the complexity is of implementing that and what the effort is associated to implementing that. Once we have agreed on that collaboratively, then it'd form a deployment plan and we'd come up with a timeline for implementing this. Sorry guys, I got a bit tongue-tied there. But typically we see this lasting around 4 to 8 weeks. That's the typical commitment, and that's across F&O and different elements of the stack. Obviously, if a business is more complex, has more units, has a more global operation, that might extend to a little bit longer. And likewise, if a business is relatively smaller, doesn't have as many units to consider, doesn't have as much complexity, only uses the financial elements of finance and operations, then that shortens dramatically. So just a few of the areas that I want to look at today in terms of outputs, and that's the target operating model, the BVA, and the deployment plan. So the target operating model, this is our suite of business processes. As I mentioned, there's just some screenshots there of what we would typically use. So this is a pretty fully fledged taxonomy. So we have these process maps from level 1 all the way down to level 4. Level 1 and 2 is what we would typically come out with out the back of a proactive discovery engagement, and then we would start mapping level 3 and 4 once we move forward into implementation, or if we move forward into implementation. But as mentioned, it's aligned to Microsoft releases and this whole concept of one vision. And it allows us to deliver results in a predictable and low risk manner. So everything that we have today is based on our experience across other businesses, and based on our experiences across other businesses and best practice. And it's also based on what we know of certain industries. And it's across the stack. Sorry, Kat.
Sorry. Just wanted to highlight the key benefit of the business process flows as well, because as part of these workshops and discussions, we are not only mapping the processes themselves, but we are also reviewing the associated security roles. And this helps us to identify gaps or corrections from a security perspective, which in turn supports effective license management, which we were talking about in the beginning. So until recently, Microsoft relied on companies to purchase the correct number of licenses. However, with the recent split of licenses, for example, you have D365 Finance, D365 Supply Chain Management, D365 Project Operations. This has created some sort of confusion, hence why Microsoft is enforcing the license process starting the 1st of November.
Thank you, Kat.
No worries.
Just a little bit around the business value assessment. I'm just conscious of time, and I know I have mentioned this, but this is really powerful, particularly in terms of pulling together a business case for any optimization or any implementation. These things are always quite costly. However, I believe if you can articulate the value well, then there's always a case in this. So we've worked with a lot of businesses in pulling that together and identifying a roadmap of that implementation. We also have a piece of software that we use to quantify the value to this. So aside from just talking around the value of what you'd expect from the functionality within the product and marrying it back to your business, we can also quantify that as well. I mentioned earlier this concept of application model driven planning. So once we have the future state process agreed, once we are aware of the areas we want to move ahead with in terms of optimizations, we would then put together a deployment plan. The one thing that I want to call out here is that we operate a very transparent model here at Mint, and actually everybody that you would speak to in the team has a delivery background, myself included. So we don't have a layer of pure sales. Everybody in the sales process has been through this for decades. So everything that gets put forward is viable, it's credible, and it makes sense, which is why we've come up with this application model. So this application model basically features some of the critical elements of a plan or levers within a plan that if they increase, either increase the cost and the time, and if they decrease, they reduce the cost and the time. So we work with businesses to thoroughly map this out, and we have that sit alongside any implementation plan that we put forward. And just to finish, I mentioned Proactive Discover Lite. So everything that we've discussed today is quite a comprehensive suite of deliverables. However, we do offer a fully funded Proactive Discover Lite that we can exercise in a matter of days. So the reduced set of deliverables, we'd still qualify F&O as a fit in terms of ERP. We'd still run the Envision workshop and a light version of the solution assessment workshops, and then we would identify areas of challenge and optimization. So if anybody's interested in that, please reach out to me directly and we can set up a call just to go through your requirements and see whether that's a fit. And finally, just to end, Proactive Transform is our implementation methodology. Proactive Discover is our prerequisite to that. So we would carry this out with any customer prior to moving into implementation. It sets up a nice foundation in terms of business process, which we then carry on throughout our implementation. It's kind of the bedrock of our methodology. Okay, so yeah, please do reach out if you have any queries around anything that I presented today. Apologies for the technical glitches at the start there. As I mentioned, Microsoft do fund this on some occasions, so please do reach out and we can see whether you qualify for that. And I just want to mention as well that we will be sending out another invite for the 8th of October. The subject of this is going to change slightly, and that's simply based on demand. So I'm sure you're all aware there's a lot of discussion at the moment around agents and Copilot and the use of AI in terms of business process. I mentioned earlier we do cover this naturally anyway in our Proactive Discover, but I want to call out how we've actually used that successfully with some customers in the past and how you might use this functionality to improve your business process. And thank you very much, everyone. I don't know if anyone's got any questions.
No, there are no questions, Sammy.
Okay. In that case, thank you very much for your time and hope to speak to you soon. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.